All right, welcome to episode 2 of the Green Zone podcast. We're going to have some hard conversations with some deep meaning around the veteran community and cannabis as well, trying to help veterans get past some of the struggles that we're in. Today, we've got a pretty special guest, Kevin Caldwell. Kevin, welcome in. Give us a little bit about your background and what your view on cannabis as a medicinal use for veterans.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the opportunity to be on this podcast. It's an honor to be on the second episode. I would also like to preface by saying I am not a veteran. I did go through some very severe trauma in my early teenage years that has created PTSD for me. Even though the source of our trauma may be different, I think I do have an understanding of PTSD that so many veterans suffer from. I was involved in politics in my youth. But starting in the early 90s, I left the Washington, D.C. area and moved to New Orleans. Kind of got out of politics for a while and just kind of led an uptown bar life, music scene life in New Orleans. But Hurricane Katrina kind of shook me out of that. Shortly after, about a year and a half after Katrina, I went to work for the city of New Orleans. And I'm sorry, before Hurricane Katrina, in the aftermath of 9/11, I was an intelligence analyst for a counterterrorism training program. I was the only civilian on the team. Every team member was law enforcement, and 3/4 of the team were also military. So I kind of developed a finely tuned, what I believe was a finely tuned intelligence analyst. For lack of better words, I guess I got good at it. Took some official training in the D.C. area. We started training law enforcement officers across the South on effective counterterrorism tactics, as well as the history and evolution of terrorism, which is where I came in. It was interestingly that the team had assigned me, this was probably 2004, 2005, to how to break the cartels. And the analysis that I came back with was the legalization of drugs. Take that away from them. Without that, surely they would still be involved in other illegal activities, but that would take a majority of their money out. And I'll never forget the former NCIS agent in New Orleans, who was part of the team, looked at me and he was like, wow, brilliant analysis. But common sense really doesn't come into play with public policy. And henceforth, shortly thereafter, I formed Common Sense NOLA, where we looked at starting to change the way that, in particular, that we look at cannabis. I went to work for the city of New Orleans, and I worked for them for 5 years. After I left my tour duty with New Orleans, my wife developed breast cancer, and we integrated cannabis as part of her to help alleviate some of the symptoms during chemo and radiation. And it was that frustration when the doctors would tell me that they could neither approve nor disapprove of what we were doing. And my nurse, actually, she later said how much she looked at the doctor and said, I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you what we're doing so that to help to make sure that you have all the information you need when you're making decisions on how to move forward. So shortly thereafter, we started working at the state level. I did. My first time, 2013, when I went and spoke in front of a special committee on cannabis in Baton Rouge. I did not know that the committee was actually trying to focus in on medical cannabis, and I gave a rather robust presentation on why we should just legalize cannabis completely. Strangely, everything that I was concerned about a medical program came to fruition into Louisiana, that we would do things so slowly and incrementally that patients would suffer, and they did. We first passed legislation in 2015, but there was an intentional poison pill put in there. And so 2016, the program very slowly started, but like a lot of states, at first they really limited the way that people could consume cannabis. And the data shows that not many Louisianians wanted to participate in the program. The program advanced by 2019 when vaporization was allowed, more patients started to participate. And then 2001, when they started to allow flower in the program, that's when we realized, I guess it was 2022. Then we really started to see the program begin to bloom.
Right.
So
And that's where we crossed paths, right?
yeah,
About 2022. Yeah.
So and it's interesting. 2 years ago, I moved out of New Orleans and I live in north central Louisiana now. And, recognizing that I lived in a bubble, in New Orleans, cannabis has been part of the culture for over 100 years. So it really was an easier sell once politicians realized that they weren't risking political capital. It's been a slower process in the northern part of the state. There are still a lot of very socially conservative people there's a representative of the Southern Baptist Convention, who said that, hey, if it was up to him, alcohol prohibition's a good idea. He just, he believes in a totally sober society. And when asked specifically about PTSD, TBI, and things that really affect the veteran community, he believed that pharmaceuticals and prayer were the answer. And I'm glad to see that his influence waned and we continue to give choices to patients. Obviously nobody's pushing cannabis on anybody, but it's nice to have an option. And it is important that, particularly for patients who are using cannabis medicinally, is that they know that they have safe, regulated, lab-tested products. And at the same time, I'm going to say something a little off the wall here is, I always considered myself a recreational cannabis user until about 2016. And then I recognized that actually I had been consuming cannabis for medicinal reasons for probably well over a decade. And it does change your words, I'm not kidding. I'm being medicated.
Okay.
Sorry, I've never made a bad decision under the influence of cannabis.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I haven't either. I don't know. While we're still waiting on Chris, co-host here, he's having a little technical difficulties. He reached out, and that's where we crossed paths was in 2022, and then funny because everything kind of led us to where we are right now on the formation of this podcast. It's almost like the stars kind of had to align because I knew that you were pretty bummed out about that Florida initiative, and then the FDA and the VA sent out their memorandum of understanding publicly, and it was like, man, that's a good way to break the stigma, or at least join the fight as it is. And then the VA said, hey, this could potentially be therapeutic for some veterans. So we'll see where it goes.
I mean, listen, I was bummed about the adult use being defeated in Florida. But then again, I'm happy to see it coming back for 2026. That was announced yesterday. And listen, every state, particularly a large state like Florida that adopts legalization, bring federal prohibition closer and closer to an end. And listen, these aren't just willy-nilly liberal states. Ohio, Missouri, these are very conservative states, Montana, that have adopted adult use. I am going to throw the gauntlet down. Congress, both sides, both parties have had the opportunity to legalize medical cannabis, which would have then opened up the use by veterans through the VA. And so both sides have really dropped the ball on this. And I think we're entering into new territory. Because traditionally, the Republican Party has always been just adamantly opposed to changing cannabis policy. But now we're seeing there's a lot more bipartisan support for different reasons. Particularly on psychedelics, when it's coming from several really high-ranking Republicans. I think what it is people want, particularly our veterans, they want them to get the help that they need. They stepped up at a time the country needed them. And strangely, I think that is part of an issue because we didn't have a draft. So it's people who voluntarily signed up to serve in the military. You can't become a protected class. So in other words, you couldn't just say, hey, cannabis for veterans. Yes. Had we still had a national draft, that could have been a way to go. But, and yes, listen, there are so many millions of Americans who do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. But I also, just like in the war against terror, the people who served are leading the fight on this. And I think that y'all are going to be the ones that really help push us across the finish line. Of course, myself, organizations like MPP, we're going to be here to help y'all.
Right.
And to make sure that the language that is being drafted actually helps. I mean, we saw that. And for example, in 2015, under the Jindal administration, we passed medical cannabis. But even though we told them not to do this, the legislators had to put prescribe and not recommend. That was the poison. But luckily, under former Governor John Bell Edwards, we did move forward with a medical program. And we were lucky because, Governor Edwards was not big on cannabis.
Right.
But luckily, there was a member of his detail who's also a veteran who, young child, really could benefit and has benefited from it.
Okay. Yeah. That's on a state level, yeah. And I think I know who you're talking about.
I just don't want to throw them out without,
Right. But no, on a federal level, a question I would have, considering your role in regional type advocacy, do you think do you think there's going to be any type of, migrational transfers to other states depending on their cannabis laws?
Because, I was on a panel about 3 years ago, and somebody asked me, one of the questions that hit was, define white privilege. I was like, oh boy, this will send off fireworks. But then when I thought about it, I said the enforcement of cannabis prohibition. And so I think a lot of people already had access to illicit cannabis, and they were not. I mean, you can look at the data, white middle-class folks or middle-class and upper-class folks in general were not bearing the burden of prohibition. Okay. And once again, I can provide data for anybody who wants that. We can see, I mean, even in a city like New Orleans, okay, I mean, we still saw 85% of the people being ticketed after they decriminalized. 85% of the people being ticketed were young African.
And correct me if I'm wrong, does the city of New Orleans have a city ordinance where someone may be able to use in our case, in Louisiana's case, medication in public areas wherever smoking is permitted?
Well, in theory, yes, because of the fact that law enforcement could not equitably write summonses, and then we found out the fact that those summonses still counted as a drug charge. So if you were trying to get a student loan or get subsidized housing or
that is correct,
all the real problems. I mean, yes, custodial arrest, being locked up, being sent to central lockup, that sucks, right? It can be a traumatic experience for people. But the long life-term consequences, to me, are the things that are really... Yes, but so what they did was they told their police officers, stop even writing summonses. If people are consuming in a place they should not, write them a ticket for violating the city smoke-free ordinance. If somebody was being incredibly idiotic, like say smoking by a school, then you could charge them under a drug-free zone violation. And the important thing also is, after we got that ordinance passed, continuing those relationships with those council people and getting data every year to make sure, hey, how was this? And I'll never forget, 2 years afterwards, I got the data and the council person was like, oh, wow, we still arrested 35 people last year. And I said, you went from 7,500 2 years ago to 35. I'm good with that. I said, that's not all the same officer, right? And they were like, no, because you got to make sure some officer may just, have wood to go after cannabis consumers. And they were like, no. One officer did it twice. And it was like, okay, I mean, as long as you're not seeing a pattern, I'm guessing that those people really needed to be off the street.
Yeah. Chip in, I want to say to anyone who may be listening that in Louisiana, you can be arrested for a misdemeanor summons or a misdemeanor offense and not go to jail, not go to booking or anything like that, and they release you on a misdemeanor summons. And that's why I had asked our co-host Chris but he's still having a little bit of technical difficulties. So go ahead, Kevin. Why don't you chime in?
Sure, 14 or less in Louisiana, just to let you know, half an hour.
Right.
North Carolina actually created a way to write a summons in 1978, but just like in Mississippi, both of them happened in 1978, but office still can figure out a way to do that. They either arrest you on paraphernalia, or in some places they still just arrest you. It's just not, I don't believe for small amounts. I think it's an ounce or below. They don't have to give you jail. That's it.
This brings up another question that's going to be an issue everywhere. But, how do we arrest people, or how do officers arrest people? And I would like to have an officer reach out and at least email. You can email the show at thegreenzonepodcast.com to provide a little feedback. Do they have states that there's no repercussion for cannabis at all, such as like California or Colorado?
Not for public consumption.
And it's like here, like in Louisiana, you can get arrested if it's outside its own package. But that's understandable when it comes to prescription medication.
So I think we need to clarify here.
Thank you.
If you have your medical cannabis in the packaging that it came from, you should not be arrested nor be issued a summons. Now, there is a little bit of leeway because we had a case up outside of Shreveport last year where a person had bought 3 grams through the dispensary, okay, and 9 months later supposedly still had 2.5 grams in that bag. And the officer did not believe that he held on to that couple of grams for 9 months and arrested, or wrote him a summons. Now, for illicit cannabis, you can have up to 14 grams and just get a summons without custodial arrest. If that is your only charge, you should be put in handcuffs and quote unquote brought downtown.
Okay.
And please, if that happens to you, let me know. You can reach me at Kevin Caldwell at MPP, marypaulpaul.org.
I appreciate that answer. Yep. Chris, are you working back? Yeah. What are you up to, guy? That's all right.
At least with a head shake, do you agree with my analysis of North Carolina law currently? Okay. Now, and North Carolina also has a very robust hemp market, which, some people really swear by THCA flower. My problem with hemp flower, and I understand that it really helps some people, is that, they have to harvest it early before that THC count grows. But that's when also so many of the other terpenes develop as well. And, often I'll go into like a legal state store. Somebody will say, "Ooh, we got this 35% flower, boom, boom, boom." And I'm like, "No, what's the terpene count? I need listerine, or I need, and I'm probably mispronouncing this, miserine. Like miserine is really good for pain." And then it's like, to me, and I mean, once again, everybody's endocannabinoid system is different, but I prefer, 18 to 24% THC mixed with a robust terpene count. And often that kind of gives me the relief in what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And that's almost borderline going way deep down that rabbit hole, because when you break it all the way down to the terpenes and whatnot, like you say, there's something for everything. There are so many different terpenes. And I think a lot of legislative issues come from the ignorance of legislators of not fully understanding. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I tell you what, that's something that I'd like to help y'all with. And I'm going to try to find somebody for your show that can really educate your veteran community as to the terpenes, who are what is best for what. I mean, like I said, obviously I'm a policy. Okay?
Right.
But I mean, I have a working knowledge of what works for me. Okay. But I'm going to get you guys in touch with somebody so that your listeners will be better educated. So that when they go into a dispensary, whether it's a medical dispensary in their state or an adult use in what I call free America, they can make educated requests. And at the same time, sometimes educating the staff. I mean, I've found in Louisiana, oftentimes I've gotten to the point that I kind of stopped trying to have education or conversations when I go to the dispensary because I don't want to spend an hour in there.
Right.
But, so many pharmacists and pharmacy techs aren't educated about cannabis in their formal training. And I have met some that have taken it upon themselves to really become excellently educated on the topic. But this is not traditional medicine. No, this is holistic medicine. I mean, I believe that Mother Earth provides what we need.
Yeah, and I believe that's where Chris touched on the first episode is that, something might work for me, but it might not work for you. And guess what? You move on to the next one. But with something like cannabis, it becomes tricky because especially for, like we just stated, ignorance, right? If someone tries a hero strain that's got 30+% THC, you're going to have a terrible time, especially if it's your first time trying cannabis. Whether legally or illegally,
Go slow.
It's going to be bad.
I think you need to clarify that. It could be.
Yeah, so stand corrected. It can be bad because not everybody is the same.
When you look at other holistic medicines, it's even more so true with them. Okay.
And that goes into the psychedelic portion. Yeah.
Since I'm here and I do work for MPP, I'm going to avoid that part of it. But once again, I can connect you with a great gentleman out of when he answers his emails. He's a lawyer in Austin, went to West Point, was a combat helicopter pilot in the first Gulf War, and he has made it his mission to help veterans. And he's pretty incredible. Yeah. He's right now. Oh, good. Chris is back.
I don't know. Is he?
I'm back. I've got audio now.
Well, I hope that I haven't ran with it too much here.
No, that's why I brought you on, because it's still early in our process, and I wanted our listeners to understand that we have SME, subject matter experts in their field. Yourself working for MPP, being the Southeast Legislative Director, we can expand it into possibly doing a cohort with all the regional directors to see, hey, how can Chris and I help you guys, and how can not really help? Well, yeah, help. How can we help educate, and how can we continue to assist? I guess it is the FDA and the VA with their research.
And I've worked with Dr. Sue Sicily for many years now. She is leading many scientific research right now. She works with Arizona State University. Now she's part of I believe, a non-university associated on research, and she is doing both psychedelic and cannabis research. She was kind of well known for 2 years ago after I think like a 7-year process. She was doing a study on the effectiveness of cannabis in combat-related PTSD. And when she was finally approved for it, when she got the cannabis from Ole Miss, she returned it, said that it was junk. It was moldy, full of seeds, and obviously had been dried out for quite a while. And she's been leading a fight of trying to allow the federal government to allow research to be done on cannabis that's actually being sold in dispensaries. So what actually people are using, not just that one. I mean, I know there are several other growers that are allowed to now work for federal research, but to me, I don't know. I think you identify a state that you're comfortable with the way that they're growing botanical cannabis and let researchers use that. Because you want apples to apples. You wouldn't want somebody using California ground cannabis and then another researcher using maybe something that's indoor from Illinois or New York. So,
yeah, it's pretty crazy from a statistical data standpoint when you break it down on the different growing varieties and terpene varieties. And
well, there's no control over anything right now. I don't think, obviously some states already have cannabis use and all that stuff, but there's just nothing to really regulate and control. And I'm not saying government step in, because the government typically sucks at regulating most things. And they usually waste money while trying to regulate something. Because I look at it like this. Like, I used to be a cigarette smoker, and we're gonna make a correlation here. If I'm smoking cigarettes, I want to know when I buy a pack of Marlboros in California, it's the same as buying a pack of Marlboro Gold Pack in New York. And we need to have that same thing, because it can get dangerous when you've got somebody that has a medical issue and they need a certain strain with certain terpenes in it. They're not going to get it if they buy something else, or the other person's in a different state, it's going to be different. So there's got to be some sort of control for us to be able to ensure that people are getting the proper type of cannabis that they need for the issues that they're facing. I mean, does that make sense to y'all?
I think that's going to have challenges when it comes to flower. Okay. Just because the different strains, and in all honesty, the willy-nilly way people name strains, which really there isn't even really strains. It's something we've put in our head. But I think that there is room but I think you were going in that right direction. And
I think so.
When I would look at standardizing doses, okay, I don't care if it's 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 7.5, or 10. I personally think it should be 5. And then that way, a dose is a dose is a dose. That I think is very important, especially for edibles. And age gating, some of these things could all be like a Schedule 6, a cannabis-specific schedule. And allow for interstate transportation, these type of things. And I mean, in the end, cannabis market in the United States could be met rather easily in a controlled environment. And, in other words, you wouldn't need half of Illinois growing cannabis to meet the needs of the United States. Actually, I think that when you look at places like Kentucky, plenty of water, great atmosphere to grow cannabis. I mean, obviously, the coastal areas of the West Coast, from San Francisco to Alaska, is probably the greatest environment in which to grow cannabis. And
you should go to Afghanistan. That's a complete joke. I would not advise going there. Not fun.
Yeah, and probably really not fun today. But it's, I don't know. But I understand where Chris is coming from. Yes, government could mess up a shoestring. But,
yeah, they could.
At the same time, I want some kind of national perimeters, because, you look at what happened to Maureen O'Dowd. She's an editorialist. I think it was for the New York Times when Colorado first legalized. She went to her hotel room, bought a chocolate bar, and went back. And because she hadn't consumed cannabis in 25 years and she was in college, candy bar. She ate the candy. She didn't know the candy bar had 150 milligrams of cannabis in it. She had a horrific experience.
Yeah, she.
And that was a huge problem. Now, it also kicked Colorado in the backside to tightly regulate, particularly edibles, because, say, for example, like you called it a hero strain. You hit a 35% bowl or joint or what have you, and you got way too high, way too quick. Fact of the matter is you're probably going to come down from that relatively quick. Okay?
Hopefully
you get up there real quickly, and then you don't stay there that long. Edibles are a different monster.
Right. And I was going to ask on that, because there's like edibles, some people do dabs or concentrate. There's different types of.
Now, if I lived in a perfect world and I was king of cannabis, which for the record, I would not want to be, because everybody would hate me. I would do that standardized dose, make sure that for adult use that you had child-proof, tamper-resistant packaging for medical. But I think that's why there's room for adult use and for medical. Okay, because for me, if you need to use concentrates or you choose to use concentrates, and that is the best option, and particularly for pain patients, and I recognize people with pain patients need a much higher dose of cannabis, I would make it so that concentrates, dabbing. I want to differentiate dabbing, because concentrates could be just oil in a pen. Okay.
True.
So particularly dabbing, I would restrict that to medical. Now, there is an argument that says if you're restricted to medical, then you're just feeding the illicit market, and possibly. But in our rush towards freedom and putting 100 years of prohibition behind us, sometimes I think people that otherwise have very good intentions are willing to make mistakes that could set the movement back significantly. It's that same problem that I have with consumable hemp products. I went to a store a couple months ago in New Orleans. Guy actually was on the MPP mailing list. There's a little picture of me on the alerts. And he was like, wait a minute, where do I know you? And I finally said, well, I'm with MPP. He goes, oh, I get your emails. And you can go to www. And you can go to policy, go down to state policy, and a map will come up and use your state. And at the end of that, they'll tell you if you want to get alerts on upcoming legislation.
I think I'd like to include that on our website, if MPP would allow that.
Oh, of course. No, that's approved. But the guy was like, oh, well, let me show you all of our products. And it had a 50 and 80 milligram drink. I have a problem with that. Now, listen, I have friends that are medical patients that have been medical patients for long periods of time, and they can handle a 50 milligram drink with no problem. But I do have a problem with a novice user getting off of work on Friday, and thinking, hey, I'm used to drinking 4 beers on my way home, not recognizing that you're supposed to do that. But come on, let's live in reality here. Okay.
Yeah.
You get off of work, pound a couple of beers. We live in Louisiana, man. It's Africa hot here. You can drink 2 beers when you get off. You're not, you're probably still shouldn't be driving, but you understand where I'm going.
To each their own.
So come in, drink 1 or 2 of those drinks. You hit a school bus on the way home. Man, for 6 weeks, the newspapers are just going to be hitting, person who was under the influence of THC.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They would run with that one.
Exactly. And so that's why I do believe that we can't take a completely, once again, this is my opinion, a completely libertarian approach to cannabis. But then the flip side is a vast majority of people who are writing regulations in this industry have never consumed the product or haven't consumed it in 20 years, or they lie about it and say they don't. And actually, most of the elected officials that I know, and I've never doxed anybody and I never will, kind of stay away from that argument. They don't want any attention brought on themselves. Trust me, that over the years, that's led to some really flustering development. But so there is room for regulation. And, Chris was, I could see him kind of nodding along, but like 50, I have no problems with, I love drink. I think that's I think more states should allow, I don't know if North Carolina does, but Louisiana, Texas, and Florida allows THC drinks in bar rooms. In Louisiana, you need to have a hemp license to do it, and that register is closed.
In Texas?
Yeah, in Texas, they have drinks in bar rooms.
That is it. That state is, I'm still trying to learn it.
We can do a whole show on, because
eventually we'll get to that. Yeah. We'll go state by
North
state.
Carolina we don't have any THC anything. You can't use cannabis. You can't have it, not even with a medical card, nothing in North Carolina.
But now hold on, but you do have THCA and hemp.
We have CBD oils, CBD gummies, all that stuff, but there are no such things as a dispensary. So if there is a way to get it around here, you'd have to do it through some sort of, I wouldn't even know where to get it because we don't have dispensaries anywhere here.
Have you walked into a hemp shop?
I've walked into hemp shops before. All they've got is hemp products and CBD. They have like 2 different sides of the store essentially, and that's it.
Next time you go, ask them if they have THCA, THCP, Delta 8, Delta 9.
Yeah, because all cannabis use is supposedly supposed to be illegal in this state, even medical use. So I don't know.
It is. We're working on it. Senator Bill Rabin did Senate Bill 3 last session. He's going to be putting it again this year. The last couple of years, just like South Carolina, the Senate passed medical cannabis, and it's the House. And there's actually enough votes in the House to pass the bill. The problem is that the Speaker of the House in both South Carolina and North Carolina, they will only hear legislation if a majority of Republicans want to hear. So it doesn't matter that, oh, we could pass this bill. It's no, if we don't have more than half of our team willing to want to hear the bill, we're not going to hear. Incredibly frustrating because, I mean, now you get stuff
Government's
done.
supposed to be for the people, and if the vast majority of people don't have a problem with it, I don't care what my lawmaker thinks. If 80% of North Carolina thinks it's okay to use for recreational or medicinal use, let us use it. We're the ones paying for your salaries. Problem is that when people vote, they don't even check up on any of this stuff, or we have to basically trade one for another. We can't vote for the person that wants cannabis because that also means the one that's going to take away my firearms. I can't vote for the one that wants cannabis or doesn't want cannabis because then they're going to do something else. So there's always a trade-off, but people don't vote based on what they think is right or wrong. They're voting on what they want. And there's not enough people voting for the type of people that will get cannabis legalized in this state.
Which brings up another issue. It's constitutional. What is it, balanced? Kevin?
I really wish that the Supreme Court would have taken that case out of the Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and East Texas district, because that differentiated. And in the opinion, the appeals court said that if you are not actively under the influence, you should not be able to be denied your Second Amendment right. Because there is precedent going back 200 plus years that if you're an alcoholic and you are actively drunk, you do not have the right to bear arms. Once you are under the influence, the intoxicating influence of alcohol, you temporarily suspend your Second Amendment rights until you sober up. And, there was cases in the early part of our country where people that were real drunkards. And we have to remember that when we compared to like 1800, we drink so little. In the United States, alcohol consumption was just mind-boggling. Just Google American alcohol consumption 1800. It will blow you away.
I am glad you said that because Leafly has an article, Leafly.com, that shows a decrease in drinking, but an increase in marijuana use.
For the first time ever, there are more daily cannabis consumers in the United States than alcohol consumers.
And you and I know personally and professionally that committees like, criminal justice don't like those kinds of statistics because it takes away greenbacks going somewhere.
Well, if they start legalizing it, wouldn't take any greenbacks away because we'd have a way to regulate it, tax it at least a little bit. You know what I mean? But that's the part they're not seeing. They see their current, because a lot of them have hands in they're getting lobbyist kickbacks for, from the alcohol companies to be able to do what they do. They just got to realize that they're resisting a change that's going to happen no matter what eventually, number one. And number two, there's still a way they can profit off of it. Just let it profit off something different. That's all it is,
Well, I think it goes a little deeper than that. Cannabis is really the only drug that smells. Okay. Now, I've heard large amounts of cocaine have a unique smell. I don't know. I've never experienced that, but not that I have a lot of experience in that world. However, for example, and I'll admit to this. Sometimes there's been a little quarter-ounce baggie of weed in my car that I think you could smell from a block away. Yeah. That you got the dank in your car. And so that gives, in fact, I was recently speaking with a judge in North Louisiana. And I told him, I said, well, listen, because we were discussing this and my questioning the constitutionality of a warrantless search based upon the smell of cannabis. I said, so, yeah, if the officer instigates the search based upon the smell of cannabis and does not find any cannabis, any other drugs that he finds in that car should be with the fruit of an illegal search.
Yeah, it seems like that would violate the fourth constitutional right of illegal search and seizure.
He just kind of looked at me and said, well, man, that would throw half my cases out.
Go on.
I said, well, that's, then I followed up with, hey, if you were equitably enforcing these laws, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If you had rich people's kids that were facing the same consequences as poor people's kids, on possession of this plant, then we wouldn't, we'd be having this discussion. And he looked and he goes, yeah, we wouldn't be having it because prohibition would be gone. So there are, and it is easy money for them. And it's not the way we often think, it's through diversion programs. So we talked earlier about those consequences of a cannabis bust that chase you for the rest of your life. And so what either a sheriff or a DA, depending, each county or parish is different, who runs those programs, they'll say, hey, okay, well, you allow us to drug test you at will for a year, pay $1,000 to get in this program. And, oh, by the way, you got to pay for all your urinalysis. So, you pony up $2,000 over a year and, this will disappear. This will be fun. And, my thought to that is, you're living in a prohibitionist state. Say that you're weaning yourself off of opiates, okay, using cannabis. And so what does that mean? It means you're supposed to go back to your doctor and get back on Vicodin and reignite something that you have a problem with, that's created a substance use disorder. So,
and then we go back to the lobbyists and all that. It's like, okay, so if cannabis is proving these effective to be this effective, and then that takes the money out of Big Pharma's pocket, and that hurts the biggest lobbying.
The biggest problem I think that has hurt, because that's the way the conversation was going up until 6 years ago.
Yeah.
You had oxys and the what is the name of that family that got filthy rich off of killing a couple 100,000 Americans with Oxycontin. And you had fentanyl. And so we've seen this deaths related to opiates. Because it's not just people doing what we think of traditionally, When I was growing up and you hear overdose, you think heroin, okay? But now it's somebody who got a fake pill that they think is a Vicodin or they think is a Xanax or anything, and they're popping this and they're dropping dead. I will say that there is no scientific proof that you can actually spike raw cannabis flower with fentanyl, because fentanyl burns up. It's not a method of delivery.
It's interesting.
You often hear this. Listen, it is the current boogeyman, but why is fentanyl so popular? Because of prohibition. Prohibition, when you're smuggling from out of the country, you're smuggling a widget. You know what I'm talking about? Widget, like in economics terms of something. Back in the 70s, people were smuggling in Colombia Gold, Panama Red, and you were making $1,000 on a bag, okay, which is this big, like this big, it takes up a lot of space and a lot of weight.
Fish this big.
And then people started doing it, and then it was cocaine in the 70s and 80s. And then magically, somehow, after we got back involved in Southwest Asia again, after 9/11, surprisingly, heroin came back. Opiates became the big thing, and mixed in with the Sackler family that created Oxycontin, and they believed, or so they have said in court, that it was not addictive. So, but these packages keep getting smaller and smaller, but the smuggler is still getting paid by widget. So if you got a plane full of kilos of weed, you could do maybe 10 in a Cessna, right? Or you could do 1,000 keys of cocaine. Well, by volume, 1,000 keys of fentanyl is the same, it continues to just grow and grow. So,
I have a weird question now.
Sure.
Is there data that directly correlates the U.S. forces in Afghanistan with the rise in opiate overdoses?
Well, what you can do is study the history of overdoses. And it is amazing that heroin was incredibly popular and destroyed societies from 1965 to 1975.
Mm-hmm.
Where were we? We were in Southeast Asia, the Golden Triangle. But listen, I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole today, but there is There is anomalies, but sadly, go. I just want to say thank you so much, but I do have to leave. And,
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and have a chat with
Absolutely.
us. We're definitely going to have you back on as it pertains as we start to break things down into regions, states, and whatnot, and then we'll continue to move forward. And the reason listeners need to know that I brought up the city of New Orleans is because it doesn't have to be a federal or a state issue. You can start small at your city level. I appreciate it, Kevin.
Come on, Chris. We're going to take a look at Senator Rabin's bill that he's going to be submitting in the North Carolina legislature, okay? And we can kind of go over the details so that your listeners can, we also have a really easy way to communicate with your legislator. So, listen, great guys. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it, Kevin.
We'll catch you on the next one, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm still here.
I'm still here. But, it's interesting stuff, man. It's a lot of this is interesting because there are so many different perspectives. And in looking at how many perspectives there are, you can see why we can't agree upon one way of legalizing it, right? Because you've got people like me that are like, well, I want to make sure it's regulated because if I'm going to actually start doing it for medicinal purposes, I don't want to overdose or I don't want to get the wrong strain or this or that, right? And then you have other people like, it shouldn't matter, it should be recreational use like alcohol. But everything in this country that we are able to consume in any way, shape, or form has some sort of oversight. And sometimes that oversight sucks from the government. Don't get me wrong, but that's like a lock keeping somebody out of something. The lock just keeps the honest person honest. So the people that are producing things that want to make it in a legitimate way are going to be they're going to have to follow those regulations. So at least it's a little more regulated to where I know that I'm not going to overdose because like he said, I'm not drinking a drink that's 50 milligrams when my body can only handle 5 because I haven't done a whole lot of cannabis over the years,
Yeah. And for anyone listening, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, one easy way to try to explain that, especially to sports listeners, is baseball. You can have all the numbers in the world. It doesn't mean that the guy at the plate's not going to knock it out of the park.
Yep.
So you need to see, hey, and watch and learn. Yes, you can tell a lot by numbers, by statistics in baseball, but it's not exact.
No,
And
none of this is exact science.
Same holds true with this, and same holds true with your field on the mental health side. Like you said in the first episode, what works for one person doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, like, I encourage people to try these avenues. You know what I mean? When it comes to, because we've known for years that cannabis has medicinal properties and treats all sorts of different things, from pain issues to PTSD, so mental issues. There's no harm in trying it. The stigma is there because of some people that did bad things with the drugs, because of the fact that the drugs are being sold illegally. But that doesn't make the drug itself bad, right? That's like guns. Guns in the wrong hand make a bad person worse, but guns in the right person's hand make it good. So at the same time, cannabis needs to get that same kind of light shed on it, that just because drug dealers have made drugs bad does not mean the drug itself is actually bad for you. You know what I mean?
I use that same correlation during Thanksgiving. I had my brother-in-law's young wife here, and she was ranting about the guns. So what did I go do? I went to my office and I grabbed this 25 millimeter dummy round that was not shot, but almost like a practice round for the Bradley system or the Stryker system. And then I grabbed the 45, I grabbed the 9, 223, like, okay, what's the difference between these? And she goes, oh God, this one's so much worse than that one. I was like, oh, they all kill you the same. And statistically, if you want to get down to it, the 22, which is the smallest caliber round, well, maybe not the smallest, but it's one of the most lethal rounds in history.
Oh yeah, it's the one that they use for assassination attempts almost every single time. The 22 is, even just the 22 rimfire is an extremely damaging round at point blank range. I don't care how strong you think you are. You get one of those to the back of your head, you're going to die. It's inevitable. You know what I mean?
And it's very quiet.
Yep, exactly. But it's a good correlation to say, good thing or anything in this world can be used for bad. I mean, look at what just happened in Louisiana, right? In New Orleans. Are we going to start taking cars away from people because somebody
Right.
used one to ram people? That logic of because it was bad in these people's hands means that nobody should get to use it just does not equate anymore. You know what I mean? Like it really doesn't. We need to start looking at cannabis as a tool, not as a drug. If we look at it as a tool, it's no different than taking acetaminophen. It's no different than taking ibuprofen. It's no different than taking any of the type of, over-the-counter type medicines that we have in this world. There's no difference. It's just unregulated, and the lawmakers can't tax it the same way. They can't regulate it the same way, so they're pissed off. That's all.
That is fair to me.
Well, I think that pretty much wraps up episode number 2. We appreciate everybody for stopping in and listening. Francis, what's on the docket for episode number 3? What are we going to dive into there?
Man, actually, since you said that, let's go ahead and take a gander at the man. I couldn't get that out to save my life.
Having a PTSD moment there where you couldn't remember words?
Well, it's just, so much going on, and my brain sometimes feels like, okay, like my computer screen. 1, 2, like 12 things are open. So, haha, the science behind cannabis. So, what I'm going to do is do my due diligence, and if there's any listeners out there that personally know anyone that may be a scientific professional as it pertains to cannabis, and I know I'd say California, but poor California has their hands full right now, those folks in LA. So I'd say maybe Colorado or heck, any major university. Yeah. The science behind it and how it has some potential to help the mental health industry. I don't know. What do you think? Think that sounds like a good one?
Sounds like a good one to me. It's definitely, we need actual scientific research and data. And I know, like you said, with data, it's not always an exact science, but at the same time, I always run off the 80% rule, right? Which means that like, if it's 80% of the time it works, you know what I mean? But the only way you're going to get that kind of data is if you have somebody actually studying it in controlled environments to know what's what. That's why this entire thing that the VA is embarking upon with this whole researching cannabis is huge. But we need more medical professionals that already have perspective to where have the gaps been already in research? Where do we need to be poking at? Where do we need to be looking? What data do we still need to create the bigger picture? But yeah, having someone on that has that kind of experience is going to be kind of hard to find.
Well, that's what we do. We make the impossible happen, man. And for all you listeners, that we know that we can't do this alone. You know someone? Send an email to show@thegreenzonepodcast.com. You can hit us up. Jeez, Pete, man. What am I, 12?
I guess you are today.
Right? Yeah. So you can follow us on all major social media platforms, and you can download this podcast on all major streaming platforms. We thank you for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Later.